Hi there, Elise again with another in my series of video blogs about how to get no feedback from Elise. I've been talking a lot about theme, plot, lead character, structural elements, all that sort of stuff. And I have mentioned every now and then about how I want you to outline, your linear story before you bust it up, and outline, the various different aspects. Outlining is extremely important to me. And I think it's extremely important to musicals because musicals are complicated and have a lot of different elements. And it can be a lot easier to put them together in an outline form and get feedback on the outline and revise it and make sure all your collaborators are on board with it and it's all making sense before you actually move forward. Now, I have my own personal set of rules, my personal rules for an outline. They don't have to be your rules. They are not the only rules in the world, but I'm going to talk to you about my rules for how I think you can make an outline the most useful to you. I think of an outline as a blueprint for what the team will use. Actually, it's a blueprint for what the book writer will use to write a rough draft of the book from which the team will then do the song spotting and write the songs. It's not to say that there's only one way to write a musical. I think this is a particularly effective way to do it. I'm not going to tell you it's the only way, but I think it's worth a try because I think it's pretty effective. So I think spending some time in outline, make sure it's right, it can be really useful to you. Now, as I was saying, my rules about an outline mean that an outline is a present tense telling of the action of the story, the important action. You don't have to tell me, you don't have to write in your outline, she gets up and walks across the room and pushes her hair away from her face. It's not that, but you can say she picks up a gun and shoots her friend. It's a present tense telling of the action of the story. And there are some other rules that I'm going to give you to help make sure that you're writing an outline that I think will help you really see whether or not you've got your structure right and whether or not your theme is playing out and your lead character is going on a journey that makes sense. These rules that I'm about to talk about are designed to help your outline make sure that all those other things are happening. Now I have something that I have something called the Outlining Lab, which is available online, where I go into a lot of detail with many long videos and exercises and assignments, and you can be working on a specific outline. I'm not going to try to cover all of that in this little vlog. You're welcome to check it out at writingmusicaltheater.com. It's called the Outlining Lab. But I also offer something that I call a warning from your dramaturg that I wrote out once to hand out to some of my students about warning them in advance about the kinds of things that I'm going to be looking for in an outline that I'm going to say, don't say it like this, say it like this, because it will help make sure all these other things are happening. And I'm going to mostly just sort of read that to you right now, my warning from your dramaturg. So for instance, let's start here. Don't draw conclusions. And the illustration of that is in your outline, don't say he is angry. Instead say he throws a chair against the wall. So what I'm trying to show you there is you don't want your outline to draw the conclusion he is angry. Let the audience draw that conclusion, the audience for your outline, by describing an action that you are hoping will lead them to that conclusion. If you simply write the conclusion, he is angry, you will feel like you've done your job as a book writer. The audience knows he's angry. But you haven't done your job in terms of the outline because you haven't said, how will the audience know that he is angry? Someone walks on stage, what does the person do so that I as an audience member will draw the conclusion that he is angry? So if you write in your outline, Joe walks into the room and hurls a chair against the wall. Then you can read that sentence or have your dramaturg or your collaborators read that sentence and make sure that the conclusion that they draw is he's angry. Then you've done your job. If you just write he's angry, you're not doing your job. Don't set the mood. Remember that an outline is not a novel, it's not prose, it's not supposed to be readable per se. And I know that's boring because if you have the soul of a book writer, you want your writing to be interesting. An outline is not interesting. So you don't want to say something like, there's an ominous darkness in the air and it is clear something terrible is about to happen. Maybe you would write that in a novel. In an outline, you just want to say, Bob throws open the door and rushes across the room where he hides under a table shaking with fear. Once again, it's similar to the first one. Rather than setting the scene for me with prose, tell me the actions that will make me as an audience go, ruh-roh, something's up. Okay? So once again, just be utilitarian. Simply tell me what the audience is going to see and hear, what actions are the audience going to see and hear, and then allow them to draw their own conclusions and see if it's working. Don't state backstory. So if there are things that you want your audience to know about your character, in your outline you can't simply state them as backstory, because that's a statement, it's not an action. So it isn't fulfilling the rule of letting you know how are you going to get that information across to your audience, how and when. So for instance, don't say in your outline, Bob, a champion tennis player, enters the room. You know, you said he enters the room, that's an action. But the fact that he's a champion tennis player, that is a statement of fact. How will your audience know that? A person walks into the room, how will they know he's a champion tennis player? You know, if he walks in carrying a trophy, if he's wearing tennis clothes, they might know he's someone who plays tennis. They won't necessarily know he's a trophy winner. One of the things you have to decide is how much of this information do they need right now? For instance, you could say, Bob enters the room carrying a tennis racket and brandishing a large trophy. If you want to make sure they know he's a trophy-winning tennis player, that's one way to do it. Maybe they only need to know he's a tennis player at this moment, so maybe he just enters wearing tennis clothes or carrying a tennis racket. But don't, in your outline, think that you've done your job by saying a champion tennis player, because you haven't done your job. You haven't thought to yourself, when do I need the audience to know that he's a champion tennis player, and how will that information come into the room? Through what action will that come into the room? Don't use dialogue. Now it's tricky because I said make sure that your outline is letting us know what the audience is going to see and hear. But you need to do that without actually writing dialogue. It can be very tempting to just fill your outline with lots of dialogue to get through it more quickly. So for instance, I would say, don't say, Bob turns to Jane and says, I love you. She replies, I love you too, Bob. Instead, say, Bob and Jane confess that they love each other. Now that might seem like a tiny semantic difference, but when you're writing an outline, the dialogue just starts piling up, and it actually becomes difficult to see the plot for all the dialogue. And the point of the outline is to be able to really track the plot and make sure that the plot and the storytelling and the arc of your main character and all that are working. And if you fill up your outline with lots of dialogue, it makes it hard to see that. So just encapsulate it into something as simple as Bob confesses to Jane that he loves her, but no actual dialogue. Don't tell me what your character is thinking or feeling. Okay, again, just tell me what the audience will see and hear. So don't say, it's clear that Bob really wants to tell Jane how much he loves her. Clear to whom? How will the audience know that? You haven't done your job. Instead, say something like, Bob begins to speak but then changes his mind. Now note that won't give you all the information. We know he was going to say something, we don't know what he was going to say. But that's because, again, you have to make your decisions about how much do you want your audience to know when. So if you simply state what you think is clear, you're making an assumption that it's going to be clear to the audience. Write the action and then see if the person reading your outline, your collaborator, your director, your dramaturg, see if they understand. Don't just state it and think that your work is done. And also remember that your audience doesn't necessarily need to know all this information now. Your outline is your opportunity to create a blueprint of when will they get what information and how will they get it. Don't be vague about your setting or the size of your cast. Your outline is a place for you to start to figure that sort of thing out. So you don't want to say something like, he walks into a saloon filled with customers, or more to the point, don't say something like, let's see, what's a good example? Something like, Joan finds out. Here's one. Joan finds out that her brother is dead. Okay, well that could be an action, but who told Joan? How did she find out? You're going to need a character to deliver the news, or someone has to hand her a newspaper article, or someone needs to run into the room, and there's going to be an actor involved in getting that information and an action involved in getting that information. So if in your outline you write something like, she finds out that such and such happened, you aren't doing your job because you haven't yet figured out how, is this just some extraneous actor, or is it which character is going to tell her? How is she going to find out? This is what your outline is for, is to make these decisions. So it's okay if in your first draft of the outline you just say, he walks into the room and there are a bunch of customers. But at some point you're going to have to think, is this a nameless, faceless ensemble? Are there, does he walk in and he sees, Joe and Amy and Jim, and these are characters in your show? You're going to, as you refine your outline, make sure that you are more and more specific. Don't be vague about these things. Okay, now here's a tough one. Don't mention songs. And you're going to say, but it's a musical. Of course I want to say, and then they sing. So I would say, don't say he sings a song about his feelings for her. Say, Bob talks about how much he loves Jane, and he's loved her since the first moment he met her, and today he's going to ask her to marry him. Why do I say to do it that way? If you simply say there's an opening number here, or there's a ballad here, or he sings how he feels here, you are leaving all of the plot that's going to be involved in that song up to the imagination of your songwriters, instead of controlling that as the person writing the outline, as the book writer. What is the story you're telling? So write the story. Yes, it probably will be a song. It's probably going to be pretty clear in your outline where you think some of the songs should go. But don't worry about that yet. In your outline, just tell the story. Yes, it will be musicalized, but the story will be musicalized, so you need to make sure you're telling the story. And if you simply say, he sings a song, we don't know what the story is of the song. So you can have a lot more control over where songs happen and what they're about if you tell the story and don't just simply jump over it by saying, he sings here. So, there are a lot of other things that I could talk about. But those are some of the things that I've discovered along the way happen in the language of an outline. Try to stay true to these things. It's tough. Outlines are dry, they're boring, they're dull. As writing, they're boring writing, but they're an essential tool that will be really important to you to make sure you can track that everything is happening the way you want it to. So think about all of that when you are writing your very, very important outline. Thanks.